listener production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. When we think about gun control problems, we usually think about the United States. But an uncomfortable fact you might not know is there are a growing number of guns circulating across Australia which are untraceable and just as deadly. Where are they coming from? Innocent and unregulated 3D printers.
It's not just terrorists and hardcore big groups of people. It's a kid at home with a printer. He could be 12 and he could print a gun without much effort.
Coming up in the second half of this episode, can the government and law enforcement do anything to stop this, or has the horse bolted? First though, time for the headlines with Antoinette Lattouf. It is Wednesday, November 20.
Hey, Sasha. G'day, everyone. So we start today overseas with reports Ukraine has fired US missiles into Russia for the first time. According to Moscow, 6 were launched at a military facility in the Bryansk border region, with 5 of those shot down. Kiev has not confirmed the reports, and we're still yet to hear confirmations from either Ukraine or the US that approval has been given to use American weapons in attacks on Russian soil. So it comes as a grim milestone is reached in the conflict, 1,000 days since the invasion. Ukraine and Russia have both declared that they will fight until victory, and President Volodymyr Zelensky, in a speech to European Parliament, urged the continent to push Russia harder in a bid to end the war.
1,000 days of war is a tremendous challenge. Ukraine deserves to make the next year the year of peace.
Meantime, Russia has lowered the threshold needed to launch nuclear strikes, reportedly in response to reports the US has okayed its missiles to be used on them. Importantly, Vladimir Putin has now specified that if a non-nuclear power, think Ukraine, attacks Russia with the support of a nuclear power, like America, it will be seen as a joint attack on the country and could trigger a nuclear response. So still that word could. I mean, Putin is trying to scare America into submission. He doesn't want these missiles being used against his country. Look, it's worth noting together, Russia and the US control 88% of the world's nuclear warheads. We do not want nuclear war to break out between these two. And this move also follows Putin previously warning the US and other NATO allies that allowing Ukraine to use Western-supplied long-range weapons to strike Russian territory would mean Russia and NATO were at war. That's nothing new. We already knew that, but just worth mentioning again. Of course, the question is, what will Donald Trump do when he gets into the White House? He claims he is going to have this war wrapped up on day one of his presidency. I would take that with a very, very, very large pinch of salt, but it will be interesting to see if his big blustery promises actually come to fruition.
Yeah, because as we know, what he says he's going to do and then what actually happens is often at odds. At the same time, there's been a lot of speculation that Trump will help stop Israel's bombardment of Lebanon, as well as ending Hezbollah's rockets into the top of the country. Because over the weekend, Trump's daughter married a Lebanese man who is the son of a Lebanese billionaire, and that had my family a buzz on WhatsApp going, look, there's a link between Trump and Lebanon. Maybe he'll end the killings and displacement in Lebanon. And my response to that is I reckon this bloke, this new father-in-law, is a billionaire first and a Lebanese person second. But there is some promising news. Reuters is reporting Lebanon and Hezbollah have agreed to a 60-day ceasefire with Israel, but a US envoy is currently in Beirut for those talks, so watch this space. The cynic in me says I wouldn't hold my breath, but, who knows?
A new report has revealed female CEOs in Australia are paid an average of $170,000 a year less than their male counterparts. The findings are a first for the National Pay Gap Scorecard, which is figures collected by the government, and includes the pay gap among CEOs after legislative changes were introduced last year. So key findings from the report show women earn 78 cents for every dollar men earn, which means women are earning on average $28,425 less each year, bringing the new gender pay gap for 2024 to 21.8%, Antoinette.
Yes, and that begs the question, what was the old gender pay gap? It was 21.1%, so there is a slight improvement there. That's if we don't include the new findings of the CEO salaries, because that's how the data has been collected in all previous years. But I wouldn't get too excited by the progress just yet, because the most significant contributor to the gender pay gap reduction is actually an increase in the wages of low-paid workers, particularly in residential aged care, where women make up 80% of employees.
The ACTU came out yesterday and said that women are essentially working for free from now until the end of the year because of the pay gap, which I found really interesting as well.
And the new data, Sasha, also shows a 3% increase in men taking primary carer parental leave. And that's an interesting and important shift because it is the largest annual increase since records began. And I'm sure that is something you and hubby have no doubt been planning for, Sasha.
Well, exactly. Actually, my husband wants to take time off when I go back to work, and he wants to be the primary carer. And it won't be a huge long amount of time, but just the fact that this is a conversation happening in households across the country is a really positive step. A wild story out of Sydney today with the city's entire train network to shut down for the whole weekend, and it's all over a union dispute. From Thursday, so tomorrow 10 p.m, until Sunday 6 a.m, all trains are going to grind to a halt. Why is this all happening? Well, the union had given an ultimatum to the New South Wales government asking for either all rail lines to run around the clock from Thursday to Sunday or face a complete shutdown.
The government came back with an offer to run a 24-hour service between Hornsby and Strathfield, which the union has rejected. And the state's Transport Minister says any other offer is unsustainable.
The simple fact is that running 24-hour train services means that our network will eventually grind to a halt. It is unsustainable to run our network 24 hours a day.
Yeah, that was Jo Halen speaking there. And look, I think a lot of people, we live in Sydney, Antoinette, but to me, this story is insane. I don't think I've ever heard of a city's entire train network shutting down for that long over a union dispute. And I just want to make the point that a lot of people, even in Sydney, are confused as to why the union is demanding 24-hour services. Begs the question, we don't know either. And there are so many times where there have been these disputes where I've actually called the union and said, can you break down for me exactly why you want this and for what reasons sort of thing. So if you're confused, you're definitely not alone.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing to point out is as well as this discussion about 24-hour services, it also comes at a time where unions are trying to negotiate an increase of 32% in pay for rail workers over the course of 4 years. I would suspect the industrial action is about both issues and not just a 24-hour service. And I guess that's what industrial action is. It's there to cause disruption to get the powers to be to the negotiating table. And so-called Doomsday fish has washed up on a California beach, sparking talk of impending bad news because that's what we need more of in 2024, Sasha. But don't start prepping yet because let's start with the facts. So the elusive oarfish, which is a 9-foot sea creature living almost a kilometre beneath the surface, is rarely seen by humans. It's only washed up on shores 22 times in the last century.
Yeah, so that's the facts. Japanese mythology claims appearances of the deep-sea fish are precursors to earthquakes and tsunamis, with at least a dozen reported on Japan's coastline in 2010, just before the country experienced its largest recorded earthquake in March 2011. This all sounds very scary. As you said, it's the last thing we want to hear is more bad news in 2024. This is the third time an oarfish has washed up in California in the last 3 months. However, a 2019 study that was supported by Geoscience has found no links between sightings of the creature and earthquakes. So, as you said, maybe don't start prepping yet. But these images of this fish are terrifying. It's a horrible looking thing.
Oh, okay, look, I'm just going with the myth, like science, schmience. I'm going with the myth. Let's see how it goes.
Well, our producer Helen has typed into our document, it's a Trump fish, so maybe it's the return of Donald Trump is...
That's the earthquake. That's the political earthquake.
It's really interesting, though. Scientists are super excited about this thing washing up because so little is known about them. They live in this section of the ocean. I've got to find it. Yeah, Mesopelagic zone, which is, 3,000 feet below the ocean surface, very mysterious and weird. And so scientists are like, yay, we can dissect it and look at it for clues as to its life in the dark. So at least someone's happy about this. Antoinette, thank you for being here for the headlines today. Next up, it's our deep dive looking at the rise of 3D printed guns.
Hi, Helen Smith here with you. 3D printed guns are unregistered weapons known as ghost guns. The guns are made using a combination of plastic 3D printed parts and metal components. Owning or printing one of these guns is illegal in Australia, but why are they so easy to get your hands on? In the past 12 months, these weapons have been seized in every state and territory in Australia. But with the massive increase in the rate that they're being printed and the fact that they're unregulated, is this just a runaway train, and what on earth can actually be done to stop these guns from being produced? Skeeve Stevens is a futurist and future crime researcher who's an expert in the weaponisation of technology. Skeeve, thanks for joining us on The Briefing. How does someone just print a 3D gun in Australia?
It's as simple as going and buying a 3D printer, getting the designs for anything. If you want to make a table, there are websites that contain thousands and thousands of design documents, which are called like STL files, that you just download, send to the printer, and it prints it. Now, it might not seem as simple as that. The plans contain the key parts, which are the frame and the receiver, which is the bolt that locks the ammunition in. Most of them still require some metal parts. So if you wanted to 3D print a Glock handgun, which is the sort of New South Wales Police, what they carry, you still need to buy the sort of slide top. Now, in Australia, that's a gun part, so that's hard to obtain. But the problem is that there are now new guns that are almost 100% plastic. And that's followed by another problem, that you can now get metal 3D printers. So the barrier of trying to obtain the top slide for a Glock will not be a problem soon. Now, those are still out of the reach of normal people, like $150,000, but we know what's going to happen in the 3D print industry. That'll be $75,000 next year, $35,000 a year after, and you'll be selling it at JCar for $500 or $1,000 in 3 to 5 years. So that's where we're going to have to get extra worried. The world of 3D printed guns is actually bigger than people realise. So one of the things that's just appeared this year, and while the main websites don't have the designs for them, they are on the dark web, and that is weaponised guns on drones. So those are hitting now. Now, that is a different problem for the police.
So what are the laws in Australia currently around 3D guns? Is there any current legislation surrounding being allowed to print a gun in Australia at all?
No. Well, I will speak for New South Wales. That's where we are, and it's where I know the laws the most. So having guns is not a good thing. Ammunition is, and it's illegal, just typical like any other normal guns. But the problem in Australia, and I know that New South Wales, I think it's a 15-year sentence, and I think Tasmania is a 21-year sentence. Even having a USB key with the file on it is the same offence as almost having the gun. And I find that problematic, that you can have a data file, and there are a lot of people out there at universities and research places that do research on things. And I mean, me, for example, and I've got the 3D printers and I've got everything, and I'd like to do some research on some of these things, but you can't. You can't even, if you download it, and I mean, I don't know if you downloaded it that the intelligence or police would know, but if they find you with it, it's as though you were trafficking in weapons for having a USB key with a file on it. So that's that bad. Now, the problem with that is they've got to try and keep up. So what is in that file? Like, the legislation doesn't seem to be very, very specific about what the weapon is, but there's so many other kinds of weapons coming and modifications to drones, and is that a weapon? And if you've got a robot, like we've got robots coming soon. I mean, I've got a robot dog, and that is even designed to have a mount on it with an assault weapon. And there is lots of things coming, and the question is going to be, we call it agency, which is, did you do it? Can they prove that you're the one that typed it and or controlled it? So the biggest problem with these is, so they're called ghost guns, and that's one of the biggest issues, is that the police cannot track them in any way. No serial numbers, no barrel striations, and some of these 3D printed weapons actually look like kids' toys, and they're nice and colourful and neon. And how, at the moment, would a police officer even know if that's someone's holding a semi-automatic weapon at them. It'd be great if we had more national uniform laws about some of these kinds of things.
So you mentioned there some of the types of guns that they look like toys and they're real semi-automatic weapons. If you've got the blueprint and you've got the printer, can literally any type of gun be 3D printed?
Basically, yeah. So they're using 45 ACP ammunition, 9mm ammunition. I would imagine it's not being great being the company that makes Glocks, because they're one of the most common 3D printed. And I had a look at the website last night to see how many downloads have been on some of these guns and on the files. And there was like tens of thousands of downloads. So that's in the US. There are only, out of 50-odd US states, there's only like I think 10 where they're actually illegal. The rest of the states, it's completely and fully legal to do this. So this is where it becomes complicated. So when I actually went to this site that was set up, the website's actually set up by the original guy that did the first printed handgun, Cody Wilson. And I went to that site and my home internet is on Starlink, which is the satellite. And it said, I can't tell where you're coming from, so you can't do this. You know, an hour later I went back and I did hit refresh and it was like, what do you want to download? So he tries to stop people that shouldn't be downloading it, but clearly, I mean, I didn't even try to do anything, but it was like, okay, you can download this now. But there was so many weapons on there, and it's going a little bit beyond replications of modern guns. They're now being very creative. I watched a video or two and it's like, they're calling it like art weaponry. So like you got things that like dragon muzzles and all sorts of crazy things. And then you've got all the sci-fi and the anime. Like you go to one of those costume anime events and they're all like got their replica weapons and things like that. Who says they're not real now? I saw the other day 3D printed mines, and they're just mines that you bury in the ground and things. So it goes beyond guns. So it's not just the handgun that people are worried about. It's the flying drone that can now shoot. It's the bomb that it can drop. It's the thing that you can stand on. And these are all 3D printed.
So how dangerous are these printed guns?
They're just guns. A while ago, I saw some forensic videos by the London police, and some guy was found with a couple of proper assault weapons, and they were doing tests on them, and they were using what they call ballistic soap, which is that like big sort of square, sort of malleable thing that they can shoot, which is supposed to design to emulate the human body. And this gun that they were testing was doing 15 centimetres of penetration, which means it's completely lethal. So, and I've seen fully automatic weapons that are 3D printed, like not just rapid fire, but fully automatic weapons. The FCG-9 is being used in the war and in Myanmar, like actually by the soldiers. So this is a new world. Like imagine the Ukraine not being able to get like weapons funding and just going, okay, we will print the weapons. And all we need is the polymers or things like that and the small bits and pieces. So it's going to be a different game when the militaries or the non-state actors and the terrorists and everything can start to just print their own.
Who is using them apart from far-right rebel groups and some of the people you've mentioned before? Do we know in Australia who's printing them and who's using these guns?
It's kind of anyone. Anyone that, I guess, that would need those things that would find it hard to get otherwise, which you need money and contacts. And if I had $10,000 with me right now, I wouldn't really know where to go. But with $10,000, I'm down to the store, get a 3D printer, buy some filaments, watch a few hours of YouTube videos, and can print an assault weapon. And as long as I can get some of the 9mm ammunition, which would probably be a lot easier to get than the actual guns themselves, then I'm now weaponized. Now, this is the problem. You got the bikie gangs and the different types of gangs. You've got the standard criminal gangs, and we have that in Sydney and Melbourne. There's shootings all the time. So it's not just terrorists and hardcore, big groups of people. It's a kid at home with a printer. He could be 12 and he could print a gun without much effort. The thing that worries me is that with normal guns, we can put a lot of rules in place, like driving a car. But we have a lot of complexity trying to legislate against normal items. The amount of companies that use 3D printers is obscene, and they have a legitimate reason to use all the different types of filaments. So legislating that is very complex, and there's literally no age limit. If you've got some money, you could be 8 years old and wander down the street and buy it.
So on this point exactly, should 3D printers be regulated? Should there be age limits? How do you do that? Should it be on the manufacturers? Should it be on the people who sell these printers, the government?
Then what will happen is what happens with vapes at the moment. So I'm an anti-smoker, and I was with someone yesterday and on a motorcycle ride, and we stopped, and he just ran across the road into a shop in somewhere where we were near and just walked out with his vapes. The laws against this don't seem to matter, right? We know all the firebombings of the stores in Melbourne about who won't sell the illegal cigarettes and things like that. We just transfer that to where do I get my 3D printer? I'm sneaking to a little store, and like instead of a cigarette store, it's some sort of other office work store, or someone sells stationery. It's like, have you got the so-and-so filament? I need this. And like we all will do is do that. We'll just move it to that. But every school has 3D printers. Everything has 3D printers. So I don't know how you would even potentially legislate that tomorrow. So that is so far beyond the attempt at regulating that in almost any way, in my thought.
So ghost guns have been found and seized in every state and territory in Australia. Do we know what the government is doing? I know there's a police task force that's been a national-wide kind of response. But is the government doing anything to really stop this? In
my opinion, I would think that the government can't really do anything to stop it. If they see them for sale, it's like, realistically from the government's perspective, it's no different to illicit drugs. If it pops up, they find someone dealing them, whether they're dealing weapons or dealing drugs, they would then do what they do in their investigations and follow it back to their source as much as possible to stop that. But what else can they do? You can't prevent the internet. And now with the advent of AI, and I think OpenAI just announced their new agents, an agency where AI does something for you, you'll be able to go to it. The new prompts will be, find me a path to be able to use social media or buy 3D printed things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it'll just do it for you. The website that Cody Wilson set up, the Australian government has been lobbying the US government for 8-9 years to try and get him to shut it down. I often try to come up with ideas on how you would stop some of these things. But I think this is one of the things that the horse has bolted. It's trying to close the door afterwards.
Skeeve, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
That was Skeeve Stevens there, who's an expert in the weaponisation of technology. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. Thanks for listening. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it as well. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search for Listener Newsroom. And we'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
Listener.